Good evening, everyone. It's Liz, and this is my first annual Campfire Tales. I'll be doing this every Halloween, if you enjoy this one, that is. And I've never done anything like this before on the channel, so what I'll be doing is I'll be reading a variety of scary and chilling tales in honor of Halloween. So, with that being said, if you're not into horror stories or you don't like to be somewhat frightened, I won't be offended if you skip this video and go check out my usual fairy tale roleplays that I adore making. I'm not going to make this a regular thing doing these horror stories, but I thought for Halloween it might be fun. So, my plan is to kind of have a brief music interlude between each story so that you can listen to this without necessarily looking at the screen. Now, all these stories are going to be shorter. There's not going to be anything too long because I want you to be able to listen to them and pause it and come back to it, whatever the case may be. So, again, I warn you, these are scary. I am reading them to you in a brightly lit room. I was finding them online. They're all from Reddit and a Campfire Tales website, and I'll link them all below, all the websites. And I was getting scared even researching them, or looking them up. So here we go. The first story is called My Brother Charlie. I hate it when my brother Charlie has to go away. My parents constantly try to explain to me how sick he is, that I am lucky for having a brain where all the chemicals flow properly to their destinations, like undammed rivers. When I complain about how bored I am without a little brother to play with, they try to make me feel bad by pointing out that his boredom likely far surpasses mine, considering his confinement to a dark room in an institution. I always beg for them to give him one last chance. Of course they did at first. Charlie has been back home several times, each shorter in duration than the last. Every time without fail it all starts again. The neighborhood cats with gouged out eyes showing up in his toy chest. My dad's razors found dropped on the baby slide in the park across the street. Mom's vitamins replaced by bits of dishwasher tablets. My parents are hesitant now, using last chances sparingly. They say his disorder makes him charming, makes it easy for him to fake normalcy, and to trick the doctors who care for him into thinking he is ready for rehabilitation, that I will just have to put up with my boredom if it means staying safe from him. I hate it when Charlie has to go away. It makes me have to pretend to be good until he gets back. The Black Lagoon. To celebrate their first year in university, 6 friends went camping in the wilderness. After driving for several hours from the nearest town, they discovered a lagoon. Nestled beside a cliff that was ideal for diving. They set up camp in the woods nearby and spent the evening swimming in the warm, clear water. As the sun sunk below the trees, one of the friends went up to the highest point on the cliff and jumped off, while the other 5 watched from down below. Their laughter slowly subsided as they waited for him to surface. It only took half a minute for them to dive in after their friend, fiercely for him. Finally, they disentangled themselves and came up for air, but they never saw their friend again. Heartbroken, they returned to the city and passed a strange and lonely year, in which their only solace was the knowledge that they would return to the lagoon to honor their anniversary of their friend's death. A year passed, and they returned to the lagoon as a memorial. But as they approached, they saw their friend standing there, his head bowed. Excitedly, they called to him and began running towards him, but he didn't turn around. As they got closer, they called him more desperately, but still to no avail. With joy, they ran towards him, but stopped dead in their tracks when they saw that not one, but 5 crosses were on the water side. A quiet cabin deep in the woods. My wife was shaking me quietly. I looked around the cabin. The girls must have gone to bed. The fire had burned down to embers. My glass of scotch was still in my hand. "Something is tapping on the porch," she said, and I heard it too. I grabbed my axe and lit the lantern. I opened the door expecting a raccoon or a skunk, but instead found only a boy of about 10 years old. He stared at me petrified for a moment, then bolted down the path through the woods. I chased after him. He was losing me, but I heard him tumble to the ground. I leapt on top of him in a rage. "Why were you knocking on my porch?" I screamed. "My uncles told me to," he stammered. I was no longer angry, but confused. "But why?" I asked. He replied, with a grin coming to his face, "To get you out of the cabin." Timekeeper. He had been given the watch on his 10th birthday. It was an ordinary gray plastic wristwatch in every respect, except for the fact that it was counting down, not up. That is all of the time you have left in the world, son. Use it wisely, his father had told him. And indeed he did. As the watch ticked away, the boy, now a man, lived his life to the fullest. He climbed mountains and swam oceans. He talked and laughed and lived and loved. The man was never afraid, for he knew exactly how much time he had left. But eventually the watch began its final countdown. The old man stood looking over everything he had done, everything he had built. 5, he shook hands with his old business partner, the man who had long been his friend and confidant. 4, his dog came and licked his hand, earning a pat on the head for its companionship. 3, he hugged his son, knowing that he had been a good father. 2, he kissed his wife on the forehead one last time. 1, the old Once, in a little village not that far from here, there was a problem. Animals had started dying off one by one. In the morning, their owners would see them lying outside, with 10 holes in their chest. The people thought it was the work of their neighboring town, with whom they had had a rivalry for many years. Then one night a man by the name of Fred was closing his store for the night. It was very late, and he was anxious to get back home to his family. He shut off all the lights and closed the door with a satisfying click. As he turned around to go to his car, he saw a dark shape in the distance. He stood still, trying to make out what it was. As it got closer, Fred turned to go. It was the last move he ever made. The next day they found him with 10 holes in his chest. This made the town quite worried. They were scared of more people getting killed. So one night 2 brave brothers, John and Jacob, went out to get rid of the problem. They each took knives and walkie-talkies. They said goodbye to their father and kissed their grandmother on the way out. The 2 boys decided to split up. One would go by the site of the murder, and the other would wander the streets. If one was attacked, they could use their walkie-talkie to contact the other. So they set off, keeping a close eye on the shadows. Nothing seemed to be happening. It was a calm night, and it seemed like they would get home safely. But then suddenly John heard a crackling in the bushes behind him. He tried to call his brother, but it was too late. The figure leaped out of the bushes and tackled him, gouging his chest with its nails. Luckily, Jacob heard the commotion and rushed to help him. He leaped through the air and cut off the creature's right hand. The creature screamed and ran. Jacob took John to the hospital, and they bandaged him up and sent him home. The doctors called them heroes, and finally they got home at about 6 in the morning. Only their grandmother was up, so they said good morning, then went back to bed. Neither of them noticed that she was missing her hand. He stood against my window. I don't know why I looked up, But when I did, I saw him there. He stood against my window. His forehead rested against the glass, and his eyes were still and light, and he smiled a lipstick-red, cartoonish grin. And he just stood there in the window. My wife was upstairs sleeping, my son was in his crib, and I couldn't move. I froze and watched him looking past me through the glass. Oh, please no. His smile never moved, but he put up a hand and slid it down the glass, watching me, with matted hair and yellow skin, and a face that matched through the window. I couldn't do anything. I just stayed there, frozen, feet still in the bushes I was pruning, looking into my home. He was standing against my window. The Intruder. A young boy sleeping in his bed on a usual night. He hears footsteps outside his door, peeks out of his eyes to see what is happening. His door swings open quietly to reveal a murderer carrying the corpses of his parents. After silently propping them up on a chair, he writes something on the wall in the blood of the dead bodies. He then hides into the child's bed. The child is scared beyond belief. He can't read the writing on the wall, and he knows that the man is under his bed. Like any child, he pretends that he slept through the whole thing and hasn't awoken yet. He lays as still as the bodies, quietly hearing the breaths from beneath his bed. An hour passes, and his eyes are adjusting more and more to the darkness. He tries to make out the words, but it's a struggle. He gasps when he finally makes out the sentence. "I know you're awake," is written there in blood, as he feels something shifting underneath his bed. The Lost Phone. Last night, a friend rushed me out of the house to catch the opening act at a local bar's music night. After a few drinks, I realized my phone wasn't in my pocket. I checked the table we were sitting at, the bar, the bathrooms, and after no luck, I used my friend's phone to call mine. After 2 rings, someone answered, gave out a low, raspy giggle, and then hung up. They didn't answer when I tried to call again. I eventually gave it up as a lost cause, figured that I'd get a replacement phone the next day, and made my way back home. That's when I found my phone laying on my nightstand, right where I'd left it. The Evil in the Room. Marcia Bennett told me this story herself. She had been north to visit friends in the state of Washington. Now she was driving back to her home in California. The last lap of the day's journey was over, the Cascade Range that stretches from Washington to California. It was late in the evening, and snow had started to fall before she finally reached the little Oregon town where she planned to spend the night. Tired and ready for a hot meal and a good night's sleep, she stopped at the first place she came upon. It was an old hotel on the main street. The lobby had a musty odor. The seedy clerk behind the desk signed her in. Her room was on the 3rd floor, room 310. She helped an elderly bellhop with her luggage. As soon as the door to the room was opened, a blast of hot air struck Marcia full in the face. Along with the hot air came something else, something she could not define, but that filled her with complete and utter dread. It was heavy and depressing, she explained, with a strong scent of evil. She felt as if she were about to faint. All she said was, "It's awfully hot." The bellhop tinkered with the radiator knobs. Then he opened the window and left. The room began to cool off, but the feeling of despair and dread grew even stronger. It centered on the open square of black window space. The terror seemed to speak, but only within her mind. "Go to the window," it said. "Throw yourself out, out, out." Terrified, Marcia flung herself on the bed farthest from the window. "I kept saying no, no, no to that voice," she told me, but the voice kept insisting. "You can't fight me, you puny thing," it said. "Sooner or later you'll jump. I'll make you jump." At last Marcia could stand it no longer. She jumped up, calling herself a coward. "Coward or not," she explained, "I was sure that if I stayed the night there, I'd be dead by the next morning." Marcia was prepared to sacrifice the money she'd already paid just to leave, but when she went downstairs with her baggage to check out, the clerk never asked what was wrong or if she wanted to try another room. He returned the full cash amount to her instead. Marcia drove down the street to a modern motel. As she entered the lobby, she felt the dark depression slip from her shoulders, as if a heavy shroud was being removed. She became almost giddy with relief. She planned to be on her way early the next morning, but decided to stay over a day and look into the history of that old hotel to see if she could discover the reason for her terrifying experience there. She visited the local library to make a few inquiries. An elderly librarian sat behind the desk. "I'm just wondering," Marcia said tentatively, "did anything shocking ever happen in that old hotel on Main Street?" The librarian looked at her strangely. "How did you come upon that bit of history?" she asked. "It took the hotel a long time to squash that story." The librarian went on to tell what had happened. One evening, back in 1948, a couple checked into the hotel as a Mr. and Mrs. Oscar Smith. The next morning, hotel employees found the young woman's body lying on the sidewalk outside the hotel, beneath room 310. The man who had registered as her husband had disappeared. At first they assumed suicide, the librarian concluded. But then they pried open her fist and found she was clutching a handful of his hair, his dark, curly brown hair, obviously not her own. So they made a search for the murderer, but he was never found. "By the way," the librarian suddenly added, "isn't that a coincidence? It happened on October 30th, 66 years ago yesterday."